Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm doing a book video presentation on The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is by far probably one of the best books I have ever read. I've seen the movies, I've seen series, I've seen Lord of the Rings and all that, and I was really into that stuff. But the way that the book just describes everything, it goes into so much more detail and so much more into what the book is actually about. Excuse me, such as Bilbo not wanting to go on an adventure. And here, Gandalf the Grey shows up to his door, marks it, and here comes dwarves, and lots of them, to go on a quest. Gandalf the Grey and Bilbo, along with all the dwarves, to go to the north, where there is a mountain. When Gandalf the Grey shows up, and he's with the dwarves and Bilbo, he's trying to talk them in to going on this quest that they are determined to take from a dragon that is there. Its name is Smaug. And this was the kingdom of the dwarves back in the day. And one of the main characters in here, which is one of the dwarves, his name is Thorin, and he is a descendant of the kings of that mountain. And I think it's really interesting because in the movie, these dwarves just kind of showed up and they were expected to go on a journey. But in the book, it goes back to so much more history and to so much more depth and just really intricate details about the history of the dwarves, how they came to be, and what drove them out, which we now know is Smaug. Another part of this book that I really like is how it seems to give so much detail and just so much information, but it doesn't seem like the book is long. The pages are really easy to turn. It's a really quick page turner. I would catch myself actually, and I do not like reading. This was a book that I could really sit down to. I could just sit down, turn the pages, and I would really be interested because something that I, and maybe you, like, which is kind of, would say, nerdy stuff, such as The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and Knights and stuff of all that matter. And I just really liked it because it was just, the author kept me engaged in the book at all times. And that was a need for me, especially on this book, because I wouldn't be able to finish it if it wasn't. Another thing that I like is that when they battle or how they fight or anything like that, it's really interesting of how it seems different in the book from where I watched the movie. And I'm comparing it to the movie a lot because this is something that a lot of people have seen, and not a lot of people have actually read The Hobbit, which I very, very much encourage you to do so. And one of these parts in the fight is quite relatively beginning of the book, when they call the Hobbit, which is Bilbo Baggins, which they call a burglar. Well, he's not, but that's what they called him because that's what they had to make him, and Gandalf needed it so they could actually steal from the dragon. But not going to spoil the end too much. However, during this fight, the author explained things very well, and I'm actually going to read a little bit of it from quite early in the beginning of the book. This was a fight when Bilbo and the dwarves ran into a few trolls and they fought them. And Gandalf wasn't around, so it was just kind of like up to them. It was kind of an underdog moment. And during then, so this is on page 38, right when they're beginning to fight the trolls. And this is what Bilbo started. He said, "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he. "Oh, are they?" said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire. Before they could leap on him, he caught up a big branch all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye. Bert is one of the trolls that they are actually fighting. And where I left off, it said, "And Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg, which is also another troll, as well as he could. It was thick as It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorn's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just as that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorn's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks with 3 angry trolls, and 2, with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo, up in a bush, with his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. And this is one of my favorite passages, just because it brings emotions into the reading. It's not, the author's not just talking to you. He's telling you a story, and the story that which you can picture in your head, which you can understand and you can feel through the characters. And that's also a huge seller for me. And that's just one of the things that I like most about this book, was that he just knew how to transfer information without just talking to you. He knew how to just tell it in a fascinating way. In this book, I learned a lot, not information that you would get from like English class or anything like that. I learned how, when reading, you can obtain information and how you can transfer that and put it into pictures in your brain. Because for me, during this whole entire book, I was picturing everything happening. I was picturing them fighting. I was picturing them being chased by all of their enemies, and just the mysterious ways of Gandalf the Grey and how he would talk to him, and just all of the fascinating things that the author would say. And that for me is a huge selling point, just because you can stay completely into the book, and you wouldn't have to really worry about not understanding, not going back and reading it. I never had to do that because I just fully understood, even though that it's kind of Old English and it's hard to understand, and some of the words are harder to understand. The context clues that the author gives completely just makes you feel like you know exactly what he's talking about and you were there when this happened. From that, I think a lot of people would benefit, especially like me, people who don't really like to read, who would rather just read from an audiobook or something like of that matter. But for me, being someone who doesn't like to read, this was an amazing book for me to start on, because it's something that even if you don't want to read, you're always wanting to know what's going to happen. And like, again, I'm comparing it to the movie. You already know what's going to happen in the movie, but it's not quite the same. So I go, oh, I wonder how this is going to be different. I wonder if I'm going to like this more, or things of that state. But I extremely recommend getting this book and reading it, because it's such a page turner and it's so interesting. Even if you've seen the movie or anything like that, or movies, or you know kind of what happens but you're not completely sure, I extremely recommend to get this book, because it's just not the same. It's almost like watching a completely different thing in your head, as J.R.R. Tolkien, which is a great book, transfers the words into your head, and from there it turns it into a movie. And it's a movie you've never seen before, and it could be different for everyone. And that's why I extremely recommend it, because you never know the movie that the author is going to play in your head.